They say that by 67 your battles are over and your story is written. They couldn't be more wrong. For Eleanor, 67 was the year her world finally and completely collapsed. After 40 years of devotion, her family's bakery, the Flourishing Hearth, is on the brink of foreclosure. She is a woman deemed too old by the banks and finished by a world that has no patience for tradition. Her central pain isn't just the red ink on the ledgers, it's the terrifying, soul-crushing idea that her entire life's work will be erased, leaving nothing behind but the scent of stale bread and failure. There is only one person who can help, but it's the last person on earth she'd ever ask, Arthur Vance, the man who spent 3 decades trying to destroy her, the man she blames for every sleepless night and every lost customer. Now, her worst enemy has offered her a lifeline, a second chance, but his help comes with a condition that feels worse than ruin, a forced partnership. This isn't just an emotional story about saving a business. It's a journey that will unravel a 30-year drama, forcing her to question every truth she held dear and unearthing a secret that binds them together. This is a story that proves a late-life romance might not be about love at all, but about a truth that could either save her or destroy her completely. The aroma of yeast and sugar, once Eleanor's greatest comfort, now smelled like decay. At 67, she stood in the heart of the Flourishing Hearth, a legacy passed down 3 generations, and watched it die. The red foreclosure notice on the counter was a stark wound against the worn marble, a final punctuation mark on a long, emotional story of decline. This wasn't just about saving a business, it was about losing the only soul she'd ever known. She felt the weight of her 55-plus years pressing down, choking her with failure. Eleanor gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She'd weathered recessions, changing tastes, and the creeping indifference of a gentrified neighborhood. But this was an ending. Just yesterday, she'd given the last of the day-old loaves to Mrs. Petrov, knowing she couldn't spare it because her pride demanded dignity, even in ruin. That same stubborn pride was the fortress she now stood trapped within, a fortress that had kept her safe and left her utterly, bitterly alone. Then he had walked in, not a customer but a vulture, Arthur Vance, the man whose chrome and glass artisan rise across the street had siphoned her lifeblood for 3 decades. He'd looked around, his expression unreadable, and placed a crisp envelope on the counter. "I hear you're in trouble, Ellie," he'd said, his voice a gravelly echo of a past she'd buried. "I have a proposal. It's the only way you'll survive this, a second chance." His proposal wasn't help. It was a surrender, a partnership, the ultimate humiliation. This was the man who'd stolen her grandmother's recipes. Or so the story went. The deep drama of their rivalry was town legend. Now she had to choose. Let the bank seize her history or hand the keys to the enemy who caused it all. She stared at his card, her hand trembling, knowing this decision wasn't just about the bakery. He picked up the phone on the second ring, his voice calm. "I knew you'd call, Eleanor, but my help requires one condition you haven't considered." The silence after she hung up was louder than the humming refrigerators. 40 years. She'd poured her youth, her marriage, and her entire soul into the cracked plaster of these walls, her hands permanently dusted with flour. Now, at 67, it all came down to this single, degrading phone call. She sank onto a worn wooden stool, the dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light, feeling every second of her 55-plus years. This wasn't just a failure of the bakery. It was an erasure of her entire life's work. She'd tried everyone else. The bank saw a high-risk senior, not an artisan. Her children, scattered and struggling with their own lives, offered only stressed-out pity. There was no one left. Arthur Vance, with his predatory instincts and infuriating success, was the only one who saw the value, or the weakness, left in the flourishing hearth. He was her last resort, the absolute bottom of the barrel, and the worst part was he knew it. This painful, emotional story was reaching its inevitable, humiliating end. She'd hated him for 3 decades, a slow-burning resentment that had become part of her daily routine. As familiar as kneading dough, this was the deep drama of her life. He represented everything she despised: cold efficiency over heart, fleeting trends over lasting tradition. The memory of her father warning her about that Vance ambition echoed in her mind now. That same ambition, laced with a chilling confidence, had her trapped. Saving a business this way felt like a betrayal of her father's memory. But losing it felt so much worse. His help wasn't just a loan, it was an invasion. "I'm not just signing a check, Ellie," he'd said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm coming in." His one condition was that he wouldn't just be a silent partner. He would be there, with her, every single day. She looked at the clock. 5:00 p.m. He'd be there at 6:00 a.m. tomorrow to assess the damage. As if to twist the knife, a text chimed on her old phone. It was from him. "And Eleanor, we're starting with your grandmother's scone recipe. You've been making it wrong for decades." The bell above the door chimed at 6:00 a.m. sharp, signaling his arrival. Arthur Vance didn't just enter her bakery, he invaded it. He wore a tailored blazer, smelling of expensive cologne and an efficiency she'd always despised. At 67, Eleanor felt ancient in her flour-dusted apron, a relic in her own museum. He scanned the worn floors and the humming, ancient mixer. "Well," he said, his voice void of sympathy, "this is exactly as depressing as I remembered." The sheer drama of having him here, in her space, made her grip the edge of the counter. "If you're just here to insult my life's work, the door is right there," she snapped. Arthur merely raised an eyebrow. "Your life's work is 48 hours from a bank auction, Eleanor. Let's not be sentimental." He walked straight to her prep station, his confidence an affront. This was the man who'd built an empire while she'd barely survived. The friction between them wasn't just a rivalry. It was the central, emotional story of her adult life. The very definition of rivals to lovers, minus the love. He unrolled a laminated sheet, her own grandmother's scone recipe, but with his cold, precise notes in the margins. "We start here. You're using processed margarine, Ellie." It was an accusation. "It's cost-effective," she defended, her voice rising. "It's an abomination," he countered. "And it's costing you customers." He was turning her sanctuary into a courtroom, and she was losing. This wasn't about saving a business. It was about her very identity. She felt the desperation of her 55-plus years crashing down. He looked at her, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "You're running on fumes and nostalgia doesn't pay the mortgage," she finally cracked. "You don't know the first thing about this place or my grandmother." He paused, his expression shifting into something she'd never seen before. Not arrogance, but a deep, buried memory. "I know she used hand-churned lard, not margarine. I know she let it chill for exactly 1 hour, and I know," he said, his voice dropping, "she always added a pinch of cardamom." Eleanor froze, her blood turning to ice. That wasn't a town legend. That was a family secret. How could you possibly know that? Eleanor's pride was a brittle shield, and his knowledge of the cardamom had shattered it. She was 67, reduced to a trembling mess in her own bakery, her life's work laid bare. To ask for help was weakness, to accept it from him was a surrender of the soul. But the foreclosure notice was a ticking clock. She had to choose, and the choice was agonizing. "It doesn't matter how you know," she finally said, her voice strained. "It's still my recipe, my legacy. You're here to save the business, Arthur, so save it. But don't you dare pretend you understand it." The day descended into a quiet, brutal war. He didn't just suggest changes. He executed them with the precision of a surgeon. He recalibrated her ancient oven, his hands moving with an assuredness that infuriated her. He tossed out her entire stock of pre-mixed dry goods, calling them lazy. This wasn't saving a business. It was a systematic dismantling of her methods. Every correction he made felt like a personal judgment, a confirmation that her 55-plus years of experience meant nothing. The drama was thick enough to cut with a bread knife. This emotional story was a constant, simmering conflict. They worked in silence, the only sounds the clang of metal bowls and the hum of the fridge. The proximity was maddening. He was her rival, the ghost at her feast for 30 years, and now she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his arm as they both reached for the same scoop. "Why?" she finally snapped, slamming a tray down. "Why are you really here, Arthur? To watch me fail up close?" The question hung in the flour-dusted air, raw and desperate. He paused, wiping his hands on a clean towel, his gaze uncharacteristically shadowed. "You think this is about you, Eleanor. You always did." He walked to the front counter, ignoring her outburst. "We're bleeding money every hour. Your sentimentality is the leak." He grabbed a tray of her prized Danishes. "These are stale, they go." As she lunged to stop him, her hand grazed his jacket pocket. He flinched, not in anger, but in pain. Before she could process it, he pulled out a small, tarnished object, a silver locket, heart-shaped and identical to the one her grandmother had been buried with. "You want to talk about the past? Ellie, fine. Let's talk about where I got this." The sight of the locket stole the breath from her lungs. It lay in his palm, a ghost of silver, and suddenly the bakery felt like a tomb. Where did you get that?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. This wasn't just drama, it was a desecration. That locket was an artifact of her deepest grief, a symbol of a past he had no right to touch. This whole emotional story felt like a violation. At 67, she'd been told by everyone, the bank, her suppliers, even the pity in her children's eyes, that she was finished. Arthur pocketed the locket, his expression hardening, closing off the brief flash of vulnerability. "It's a reminder, Eleanor, of what's real." He turned back to the counter, all business again. "Everyone out there looks at you and sees a relic. They think you're too old to adapt, that your ways are done." His words were cold, hard facts, mirroring the exact insults she'd been fighting. This wasn't just about saving a business. It was about proving her 55-plus years of experience weren't a liability. She was trembling, caught between the ghost in his pocket and the wolf at her door. "Is that what you think, Arthur? That I'm finished?" "I think," he said, not looking at her, "that this bakery is finished unless you stop living in the past and start fighting for the future." He was her worst enemy. The man she'd cursed for decades, yet he was the only one offering her a lifeline. This wasn't just a partnership. It was the only second chance she had. The line between them, the one that defined rivals to lovers in cheap novels, felt dangerously thin and charged. "Forget the locket for 1 minute. Ellie, we have work to do." He grabbed the flour, but she couldn't. "The cardamom, Arthur, the locket, how?" He finally stopped, his shoulders tense. He turned, and for the first time, the mask of the ruthless rival cracked, revealing a deep, decades-old pain. "Because I was there when she died, Eleanor," he said, his voice rough. "I was the one holding her hand, that locket. Your grandmother gave it to me." The words, "I was there," echoed in the flower-dusted air, shattering the foundation of Eleanor's entire life. Her grandmother, the woman who had taught her, had found comfort in this boy. In her rival, "You're lying," she whispered, but the accusation died on her lips. The locket in his hand was proof. At 67, she realized her emotional story wasn't a tragedy of rivalry. It was a farce of her own making. The bakery wasn't just failing from lack of funds, but from a blindness she'd nurtured for decades. "She knew," Arthur said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual abrasive edge. "She knew you were too proud. Even then, she worried you'd break yourself trying to be her, instead of just being you." This was the true drama, the secret that had festered between them. His condition wasn't just about the money or his presence. The condition was that she finally had to face the truth. This was his second chance, not just for the business, but for her to unburden herself from a legacy she'd misunderstood. His help was a bitter pill. Saving a business with him felt like a betrayal, yet his revelation felt like a strange, painful liberation. This man, her sworn enemy, was the only one who truly understood the weight she carried. The rivals to lovers narrative felt absurd, yet the line between hate and something else had never been finer. This late-life romance wasn't about love. It was about two people bound by a shared past, standing at the same cliff edge in their 55-plus years. "So, what now, Eleanor?" he asked. The rivalry was dead, leaving a vacuum in its wake. "Your grandmother's recipes are a start, but they won't save us, not in this market." He looked at her, his eyes clear of malice for the first time. "The bank arrives Friday. My condition, it means we do this my way. No more ghosts." He held out his hand, not in comfort, but in a truce. "Are you in, or are you finished?" Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. "I'm in." Just as their hands touched, his phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a message from his largest investor. "The deal is dead if she's part of it. Get her out now." Eleanor's journey wasn't just about saving a business, it was about saving herself from a past she had turned into a prison. She had to lose everything, her pride, her certainty, her entire history, to finally see the truth. But what is the cost of that truth when it's delivered by your worst enemy? The story of Eleanor and Arthur is a complex, emotional story, a late-life romance built not on flowers, but on shared grief, hard truths, and the desperate need for a second chance. They faced ruin in their 55-plus years, but together they had to confront a 30-year drama. What would you have done in Eleanor's place? Would you have let pride destroy your legacy, or would you have joined forces with the one person you hated most? Think about that final moment. The alliance formed, and the investor's text message threatening to destroy it all. Which single decision, right there, could have changed everything? Was this partnership a rescue, or just a different kind of trap? If this story of rivals to lovers, secrets, and finding new purpose resonated with you, please share it with someone who appreciates a story with real heart. Subscribe to the channel to follow new sagas and discover the extraordinary in the everyday.